Hello and welcome to Bethlem Museum of the Mind's virtual book club, where we're discussing Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, first published in 1621 and still in print in many different versions. For the purpose of this club, we're recommending either the version that was adapted for the stage by Stan's Cafe and published in 2013, or the abridgment published by Hesperus Press also in 2013, which contains an introduction by Nicholas Robbins. This is the second video in the series, and I'll be saying a little bit about the content of the first partition of the book, which covers page 17 through to page 48 in Stan's Cafe edition, and pages 17 through to 57 in the Robbins edition. If you haven't read that far yet, you may like to pause the video and come back to it later. Of course, you're welcome to watch without reading either of the editions, but I hope watching will inspire you to read the Anatomy of Melancholy. My name is Colin Gale, and this book club is an initiative of the museum of which I'm the director, Bethlem Museum of the Mind. It's being run during the coronavirus shutdown of 2020, and I trust it will be of interest and help to many people. Right now I'm standing in the museum next to a painting of the mid-20th century entitled A Solitary Child, which was included in a temporary exhibition inspired by the Anatomy of Melancholy last year. The artist, Marion Patrick, specialised in poignant pictures of sad and isolated children. She once wrote that young children did not have enough experience of life to connect their present experience with the remembered past or the anticipated future. And so in both their joys and their sorrows, they experienced a particular intensity of emotion. And that is what drew them to her as subjects of portraiture. Marion Patrick had her own experience of highs and lows, having been diagnosed with what was then termed manic depression. Interestingly, she always associated the desire to paint, which she experienced as a compulsion, with the onset of a depressive phase of her condition. For her, painting was a necessity, but it was not in any way therapeutic. And her recovery actually involved the eventual loss of her interest in the creation of art. This raises the interesting issue, which Robert Burton touches on in the Anatomy of Melancholy, of whether a little bit of melancholy may be good for you. On page 44 of the Stan's Cafe edition and page 53 of the Robbins edition, Burton says that Aristotle believed that melancholy men are most witty and are excellent philosophers, poets, prophets, etc. Elsewhere he writes that they are of a deep reach, excellent apprehension, judicious, wise and witty. But that doesn't mean he thought melancholia was a thing to be desired. His whole book was written to combat it. In the introduction to his abridgment, Nicholas Robbins puts this rather well. He writes, "There's no sense in the anatomy that anyone might wish to cultivate melancholy or adopt it as an artistic pose. For Burton, it was a degenerate state, and his object was to collect and summarize everything significant written on the subject since antiquity, what it is, with all its kinds, causes, symptoms, prognostics, and several cures." In other words, melancholia wasn't a state you would wish on anyone, and the purpose of his book was to understand and mitigate it. Broadly speaking, the first partition of the book is devoted to examining the causes of melancholy, and the second partition is devoted to cures. It's the first partition we're discussing now. As you read it through, however, you'll find it's not quite as simple as that. And anyway, there's no time for me to cover all the ground that Robert Burton does in his first partition, even in the abridged versions we're looking at. I'll just highlight 2 or 3 of the causes he lists. First, on pages 36 and 37 of the Stan's Cafe edition and on page 39 of the Robbins edition, Burton names overstudy as a cause of melancholy and gives what he describes as 2 main reasons why students should be more subject to this malady than others. First, they live a sedentary, solitary life. And second, they are given to overmuch study, by which he means too much study. In being sedentary and solitary and overstudious, Burton thought that scholars neglect their brain and their spirits. This description has echoes of what it's like for students during the lockdown, or for anyone who needs to work remotely during a lockdown. Being sedentary, being solitary, not having a structure to one's day that helps us distinguish between work and non-work times. The result of all this, in Burton's terms, is overstudy, contemplation, and continual meditation as a cause of madness. Second, there's a line in the first partition which is included in Stan's Cafe edition at page 41, but doesn't appear in the Robbins edition, which makes a clear link between physical and mental health. The body, according to Burton, is domicilium animi, which is Latin for the dwelling place of the soul. Its house, abode, and stay. And as wine savours of the cask wherein it is kept, the soul receives tincture from the body. A distemper of the body, by which Burton specifically means here a fever or a raised temperature, a distemper of the body will cause a distemperature of the soul. As I hinted earlier, the first partition is devoted to causes of melancholy only in a very broad sense. As you have read it, you will have encountered many diversions along the way. In his introduction, Nicholas Robbins nicely characterises the book as exuberant, copious, colloquial and chaotic, crammed with arcane erudition, and interrupted by intemperate satire and playful exaggeration. These things are what makes the Anatomy of Melancholy a pleasure to read, and the abridgments we have chosen also make it manageable. I want to draw your attention to just one of these diversions in which Burton raises the question of what makes yawning contagious. On page 33 of the Stan's Cafe edition, again, this doesn't appear in the Robbins abridgment, the answer is given to that question that many philosophers think that the forcible imagination of the one party moves and alters the spirits of the other. In other words, yawning is not a microbial contagion, but a social one. A tiny example of crowd behaviour, in which the actions of one person unconsciously and involuntarily swathe the actions of others who are in approximate distance. In today's terms, we could say that the contagion of yawning is less like coronavirus and more like the contagion of panic buying, bearing in mind that unlike coronavirus or panic group behaviour, there is nothing to fear from the innocent and harmless act of yawning. Well, I look forward to joining you safe and well next week, and in the meantime, I encourage you to read the second partition of the Anatomy of Melancholy in abridged form from pages 51 to 80 of the Stan's Cafe edition, or from pages 58 to 72 of the Robbins edition. As a member of our virtual book club, you can interact with us here at Bethlem Museum of the Mind by liking or commenting on this video on YouTube or Facebook, or by following us on the museum's Twitter account. Goodbye for now from the museum.